Okay, so let's look at this chapter. So here we are going to look at a business cycle, unemployment, and inflation. So basically, we are going to look at the measurement of labor market. Just remind you, we are in second module. So the main theme in the second module is about measurement. So we started with a chapter that explains how we measuring the GDP. And we also study how to measure price. Now, in this chapter, so we are going to study how to measure labor market activity. And this is a roadmap for this chapter. We start with unemployment in terms of how to measure unemployment. The imperfection of looking at unemployment. In the next, we are going to look at the relationship between unemployment rate and economic growth, the factor that determines natural rate of unemployment. And then, so we are going to end this chapter by looking at inflation. Okay, so that's a roadmap. Let's start with these slides. And so basically, so they just explain to you why it is important to understand how we measure labor market. And also, so this is a important slide to emphasize why we put the measurement of labor market and the inflation in the same chapter. Okay. So in this background, I should update this background, but nevertheless, so we still have the same Federal Reserve chairman, which is Jay Powell. As the chair of the Federal Reserve, by the way, Federal Reserve is the central bank for the United States. So his main concern is to balance the need of workers and against the need for price stability. And what's the need for worker? The worker, they cares about jobs. And what's price stability? Meaning, so the price doesn't grow too fast, or so the price neither grow too fast nor grow too slow. Right? So later you're going to see, so both a high growth in price and slow growth in price level, neither of them is good for the economy. So ideally, we need to have a certain level of inflation. But in general, so we need price stability. Right? And so that's why we put these two things in one chapter. Now let's start with labor market. Okay. First is look at the actual data. So this is US economy for the period of post-World War II, okay, which is 1948 to 2014. And here we present the unemployment rate. Okay, so we haven't studied unemployment rate yet, but that's coming up in the next slides. But first is look at how these numbers look like in the real economy. So a couple of observations. First, this unemployment rate fluctuates. Second, so this unemployment rate on average is a non-trivial number, which is around between 5 and 6% for a long time. And the third, so this unemployment rate never dropped below a positive number, which is more than 2%. Just keep these three observations in mind. And then in the following slides, we start with how to come up with a number like we seen in this diagram. And then, so we are going to understand what caused this fluctuation. And then lastly, we also need to understand why this number never dropped below to a non-negative number or positive number, which is here is probably like 3%, right? So now let's just start with some definition. So unemployment rate, which is a percentage of total number of people in the labor force who are unemployed. But here there are two things: unemployed, labor force. But what is labor force? Labor force is all workers, employed or unemployed. But then, so this leaves one thing we need to answer: who are considered as workers, right? And then lastly, so labor force participation rate, which is a percentage of adults in labor force. Now here the key things is, so who is considered as adults, right? So now let's just first show you the next slide, and then I'm going to use a graph to represent everything. Right? When we measure the labor force participation rate, so this is given by the percentage of adults. But here, so adults is defined as 16 years old and above. This is number one. Non-institutionalized. This is number two. Civilian population. This is number three. Okay, let's go one by one. 16 and plus, that is fairly simple, right? So you must older than 16 to be considered as adults. Okay, so this definition of adult is adult for understanding labor market. This is number one. Non-institutionalized. Okay, and then so we need to, probably it's easier to understand to understand who are considered as institutionalized. Two examples: people serve in prison, and people who live in assisted living, like in nursing home, right? Or those people who are in hospital, right? And whoever are not in those categories, like you and me, so then so we are non-institutionalized. Civilian, that means you are not in military. Okay, so that's how we define adults when we look at labor market. Now the labor force participation rate is use adult population as denominator. And then, so who is going to put in the numerator? Labor force. But who is considered as labor force? We have unemployed and employed. Okay, so employed is straightforward. So you either has a part-time job or full-time job. You are working and then you're employed. Unemployed, so that's going to define as people who don't have a job, but at the same time, who is actively looking for a job. So that's considered as unemployed. If you don't have a job and you are not actively looking for a job, you are not considered as unemployed. Okay, we will see that definition later again. Okay, now before I move further, let's just draw a diagram to help you to understand how we measuring the labor market. We start with a big circle. So this is US population. Okay, and so inside this big circle, let's just draw another one. So this is our adults, meaning we are going to excluding who is 16 and younger, who are institutionalized, or who are in military. Okay, so now let's just focus on the middle part. Let's just redraw this smaller circle. So this adult population. Okay. Oh, by the way, so the total population is around 300 million, and the adult population is around 210 million in the US. And then so here we are going to focus on those 210 million. So this is adult population. Among this adult population, there are people who not in labor force, okay, not in labor force. And then so we have people in labor force. But for people who are in labor force, there are two categories: employed versus unemployed. Right? So that's how we characterize individual in the United States. And further, this is how we characterize adults in the labor market. Okay. Now, what is labor force participation rate? So that is the fraction of adults given by this circle in labor force. Okay, the fraction of this part as of this part. Okay, so this labor force participation rate. Now, what is unemployment rate? Unemployment rate is a fraction of people in labor force who are unemployed. Okay, so this is how we define labor force participation rate and unemployment rate. Now we can look at a practice question to understand those definitions. In your country, there are 24 million in labor force, 21.5 are employed. What is unemployment rate? So remember, labor force equal to employed plus unemployed. Hence, unemployed equal to 24 minus 21.5 equal to 2.5. The unemployment rate, let's just call UR, equal to unemployed divided by labor force, equal to 2.5 divided by 24. Okay, so the answer is A. Okay, so unemployment rate is very important. It has been closely watched by the government, by central bank, by Wall Street. Okay, it's a very important indicator about the health of our economy. But however, there are some issues with unemployment rate. It can overstate the true level of unemployment. This is because in our economy, sometimes it just takes time for people to find a job. Okay? But then so you're going to characterize them as unemployed. But maybe so this individual who is temporarily unemployed is in a transition to a new job. Or maybe this person just voluntarily leave the old job and looking for some better job. But still, so this individual is going to contribute to our unemployment rate number. So in that sense, so that is going to overstate the problem. On the other hand, it may also understate the true level of unemployment. Remember, to be considered as an unemployed, you must have lost your job. At the same time, you have been actively looking for a job. Technically, it's defined as you have been actively looking for a job during the past 4 weeks. But if you haven't looking for a job actively, you are not considered as unemployed. But the things can be worse than that, but actually maybe you just feel so discouraged, you give up. But then, so you are not going to show up in this unemployment rate number. So in that sense, so this unemployment rate may understate the true level of unemployment. To understand the problem with unemployment rate or unemployment statistics, so we may want to pay attention to these three types of workers. First is discouraged workers. Those are non-working people who have given up looking for work for the time being. Why they decide to give up? Maybe the labor market is so tough. They just feel desperate or they feel hopeless. Okay? So this discouraged worker. Now you have marginally attached worker. So those who were available and actively looking for work, but are not currently looking. So meaning they have searched for a job in the past year, but not in the past 4 weeks. Okay? So if you haven't looking for a job in past 4 weeks, you are not considered as unemployed, but you are attached to the labor market because you still want to have a job. This is different from the first group of workers. And the third group is called underemployed. So those are people who work part-time because they can't find full-time job. So these people are considered as employed, but the hours they work is below their desired level. And as a consequence, they may not able to generate enough income to satisfy their need. But their trouble or their problem won't show up in our unemployment statistics. Okay? All the discussion here just point to the shortcoming of looking at unemployment rate itself. But certainly later we will explain to you how we are going to compensate the problem. Now there's a question from the students. Does unemployment account for people that are paid cash under the table by employers? That's an excellent question. So if I just illegally work for someone, and then so probably I won't show up in the employment number. Okay, and then so what that means is maybe there's a country who has lots of people work in informal sector or work as underground job. Okay, and so that's going to make the labor market statistics or unemployment statistics even more problematic. But for US, so we have good institutions, we have good accounting system. Okay, so this problem is less of worry. So it still exists, but it won't have significant impact on our statistics. Okay, but that being said, so the unemployment statistic still has problem. The problem are, as we just discussed, like a discouraged worker, marginal attached worker, and unemployed worker. Okay, thank you again for your question. Now, to understand the importance of the discussion we just had in the previous slides, we can look at the actual data. We start with the reported unemployment rate. which is in the bottom of this, is actually this one. This is a number we usually seen in the newspaper, heard from TV news. Right? So this unemployment rate. But this unemployment rate doesn't include discouraged worker. And you may want to pay attention. So this discouraged worker, the fraction of discouraged worker went up during recession. This is given by the gap between these two curves. And also this unemployment rate doesn't include marginally attached worker. Again, so this gap or the fraction of marginal attached worker is going to increase during recession. And finally, it doesn't include involuntarily part-time worker. Just think about like college students, or think about those low paid, those worker with low paid jobs, those worker who has hard time to find a good job, right? So to summarize, the unemployment rate is an important indicator to see the health of our labor market. But the unemployment rate just gives us an incomplete picture regarding to our actual health of the labor market. Okay. So now let's look at two practice questions. So first, we have a table in the top. So based on this table, the unemployment rate and what is the labor force participation rate. Let's start with the easier one, labor force participation rate equal to, so we have labor force, so we have adults population as denominator. We have labor force. Okay. And then, so that's going to give you 150 divided by 200. Now, what is unemployment rate? UR equal to unemployed divided by labor force. That equal to, now here, so we need to find out what is the unemployed. So that's equal to 150 minus number of employed, 138.75 divided by 150. Okay, the answer is D. Make sure you understand how we write these two formulas. Okay. One more question. Which of the following individual can be counted as unemployed? A, Darren, a 10-year-old child. No. So we only consider 16 and plus. B, Nazma, a stay-at-home mom. No. She's not in labor force. Moisa, full-time college student. No. So it's not in labor force. D, Carl, who work part-time but would prefer more hours. No. Is employed, it is underemployed. So the answer is E. Okay. So let's just stop here for today.